All right. Cool, yeah, hey everyone, and thank you to the team to having me back. It's not often I get asked to come back to somewhere, so that's a new experience for me. This is also the most amazing room I think I've ever done a talk in, so that's pretty cool. And we've got a nice diverse selection of presidents to accompany us on this talk. So I proposed this talk to the guys at Frontend North about 6 or 7 months ago when I just joined a company called Songkick, and I joined them as we had this large Angular app that we had to move to React, and I wanted to do a talk about all the things we've been doing and are still doing. We've not finished. And having put the slides together today, Sam kept emailing me all week asking for the slides, and I didn't have the heart to tell him that I was going to do them on the train. So I was doing them today, and I realized that really, although this talk is titled From Angular to React, and that's me on Twitter, I should say. That's not on the bottom of every slide, like you don't need to worry. It's more likely just from X to Y, my experience migrating complicated software regardless of the tech choices. So I hope that I'm in no doubt that not all of you are migrating an Angular app to React. That would be incredible if that were the case. But hopefully some of these can be applicable regardless of what you're migrating from or to, or even if you're not, or you might do it in the future. So yeah, I work at Songkick. Out of interest, who's heard of Songkick? That's not bad. Who's got it installed? Yes, that's not bad. All right, wicked. So there are two parts of Songkick, just for a bit of kind of background. We do music discovery, so you sign up to Songkick. We can you let us log in or read from your Spotify account, for example. We can tell the artists you like. We suggest other artists that you probably like as well, and then also we will then tell you when those people are like in a town near you doing a gig and when tickets are on sale and that kind of thing. So there's that side. Then we also actually sell those tickets too. So often we'll work with artists to sell tickets to their gigs. So the product I work on and the product that is the topic of this talk looks somewhat like this. It's pretty dull here. This is kind of the base view. This is like our ticket selling app. But what happens is this then gets embedded into people's websites. So an artist wants to work with us. They want us to sell the tickets. We take this, we embed it in a iframe. If you want to talk to me about iframes, like we can sob over pints and pints of beer and shots talking about iframes. But it gets put into an artist's website, and I picked a really hip, cool one like Andrea Bocelli. You can't really, the colors are a bit tricky to make out, but it basically gets embedded into, in this case, his website, and from a user's point of view, they're not really aware that it's a Songkick generated thing. It looks all as part of one website, but really that is just this styled and chucked into to an iframe. I've got a lot of iframes, and then you can go through and you pick your tickets, and you can choose where you want to sit, and you can see a map, and you can search through, and the most expensive seats here are a bargain at 300 and something euros. These two VIP tickets would have cost me 768 euros. And then you can check out, and it's a regular checkout flow, and then right at the end it goes, oh, you've bought tickets. If you need help, email customers@songkick.com. That's really the only mention of Songkick in the entire journey at the moment. And just for a bit of context, we call this internally the store, because we're very creative at naming things. So in this talk, when I talk about the store, that's what I mean. I mean that thing that gets put in an iframe that gets put into like Andrea Bocelli's website. And this is the thing that I'm working on every day to migrate from Angular to React for a number of reasons. So again, just for kind of some context, it was built about 2 years ago, before my time. I joined Songkick 7 months ago, actually just after I spoke here. So this was all started way before my time, built on Angular 1, as I said, used within iframes. Then we chucked in some Redux as well in there. The two main developers who worked on it are no longer at the company. It's full of features, some of which are good, some of which we actually never use anymore and we'll be stripping out. It makes up a large proportion of the revenue we bring in every month, every week. There are tickets being sold at a fairly constant rate. We're not talking like thousands an hour or anything, although during big sales it does get heavy usage, but even like right now that we've probably sold 20 tickets in the last hour or something, even at like off-peak times. And most importantly, it's used by all the people we like to brag about using it. So we sold tickets for Adele back in November last year, and we used this product to do it, and Red Hot Chili Peppers and a few others as well. So it's really like, it's quite high profile in the sense that if something goes wrong, we're in trouble. And as I've learned, I knew nothing about the music industry. I'm basically the least musical person to ever work at Songkick. They asked me like, what indie bands are you into? And I'm like, Bastille, they're pretty cool, right? But The thing of what I've learned about the music industry is it's very much reputation. So if we screw up Adele's ticket sales, then good luck getting any other business for the next year whilst we make up for it. So there's quite a lot of kind of focus on it. And really, actually, you might think we're migrating it because it doesn't work, but the store actually works pretty well. It does what it needs to do. It's fairly reliable. It's mostly bug-free. We can sell lots of tickets, and it works. And that's fine. If we didn't want to do anything with it and it was kind of in that state, we could just leave it and I wouldn't be here doing this talk. And that maybe would be better. I don't know. I hope not. But changing the store is very tricky, and that's really where the motivation to do this kind of work came from. So in terms of what makes it tricky, the tests are okay. They're not great. There's a lot of areas that are more tested than others. I think depending on like what angle the sun was at when someone wrote the code. There's a lot of features that aren't needed. There's a lot of craft in there. That there's features that were built well because they were needed, and then it took maybe a month to build them, and then by the end of that month we decided that we didn't actually need that feature ever. So I keep coming across code and being like, do we use this? And like, no, we never use that ever. So that's very tricky, particularly when we're working on a team where the two main devs who wrote this are no longer with us, so we're kind of a little bit in the dark. There's loads of different use cases, from like general admission tickets, big reserve seating. We have to do queued ticketing for like, Adele, for example, because we can't support like 100,000 people all trying to buy tickets at once. So we queue them up. Things like VIP tickets, meet and greet type thing. I meant to put in a picture, but I forgot. If you ever want to laugh at something, Google Avril Lavigne meet and greet, because she does meet and greets. And she doesn't touch the people she's greeting, and it's very funny. She's kind of here, and then like a meter over here is Avril Lavigne looking really shifty, and it's excellent. To contrast that, Google like Rihanna meet and greets, and there's one where she's like giving them a piggyback and stuff. It's good fun. Anyway, so this is the store, and we have loads of these in the wild because they get embedded on people's websites. Sometimes we only, they run for like a day, so we have one big on sale where people queue and they get tickets, and that's over. Some artists, typically smaller artists, kind of have the store on their site, and they're slowly like selling tickets throughout however long, 6 months longer. So we want to be in a position to iterate quickly. We've got lots of future plans around Songkick and how we're going to do things that mean we need to be able to try things out on the store, and we need to add new features and generally respond and be fairly agile in how we do that. The current code base makes it very tricky to do so for a number of reasons. So we kind of sat down, like literally just after I joined, we said, right, what are our options? What's on the table to fix this problem? And there were really 4 we came up with. There was start completely from scratch. Every developer's like favorite, the big bang kind of rewrite. Stick with Angular 1 because we know on the whole it mostly works, but take the bits that are really tricky to work with and bug fix and all the rest of it and rewrite them. Migrate from Angular 1 to whatever the latest version number after Angular is these days. I believe it's actually version 4. I think there's a few nods, yeah. They skipped version 3. But then I'm talking about React, which went from 0.14 to 15, so I'm on thin ground as it is. Or we can migrate bit by bit to something else. So you can probably guess which one we picked based on the fact that I'm standing here in front of you, but we did actually go through and seriously discuss all of these. First one, start completely from scratch. It's basically a no-no for 2 reasons. We can't afford to not be able to fix things or attempt to build new features whilst doing this migration. There's just so much stuff that we need to do. The Angular app, so this version of the store was itself a big rewrite about 2 years ago from the ground up. So I think if we did it all over again, then that would never actually get through, and that just isn't really viable. We could stick with Angular 1. Angular 1, as most people here probably know, is reaching like the end of its life. There is now Angular 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and so on. So Angular 1 is, I don't know, it's going to be supported for a bit longer, but ultimately there is like an end to Angular 1, and Angular 1 being actively developed, and the focus is now on Angular 2 and beyond. And actually inside Songkit, we don't have that much expertise on Angular. I worked with Angular at a previous job for a bit, so I can kind of get around an Angular app, but I certainly wouldn't describe myself as an expert, and there's no one with experience of Angular 2. We can migrate from Angular 1 to Angular, I'm going to say 2, but I know it's now 4, and so on. Again, there's not many people kind of evangelizing it at Songkick. Apparently it's David Moyes' framework of choice. I don't know, that's someone told me that, and I'm willing to believe it. Yeah, I do support Newcastle, by the way, so there's a slim chance there's some Sunderland jokes in there. All right, we'll see how we do on that one. Or we could, I think this is about the only time where I can brag about Newcastle versus Sunderland given recent history, but anyway. We can migrate, or we could migrate bit by bit to something else as well. Let's moving quickly on. So this would allow us to work on the current kind of system and the bugs within it and try and fix critical things that come up. We could also build new features, because if we could figure out a nice way to do this, we knew we could build new features in React whilst leaving the existing stuff as is. We don't have to break anything currently. Like, you think about how many stores we've got embedded on various websites, having to like get them, all the digital teams behind those artists to go to their site and update it is a nightmare, and that this wouldn't happen. And also, if we can migrate bit by bit, we can do it in such a way that we release the migration like on almost a weekly basis. We roll out some newly migrated stuff, and that avoids like having one like D-Day where we swap from old store to new store and see how much stuff breaks. There is a slight downside to this, which is we introduce some code that's specific to the migration, which is never great because you have to delete it, but that's this is the best approach we came up with, and it's the one ultimately that we picked. So then the question was what to migrate to, and you can probably again guess the answer to this. Not going to throw a massive curveball and just, surprise. No, we did pick React. How many people here have used React out of interest? Probably quite a lot. Cool, awesome. The reasons behind that, me and the team I work with, we're all very familiar with React at various levels. This is Songkit's actually the first place where I've used it on a large production scale, but I've done a fair amount with it. Another newer product at Songkit was built with React, so there's more kind of people talking about it in the company. And probably my favorite benefit of React, other than it being Rafa's framework of choice, is that it ties you way less to a particular framework. So in Angular, for those who know it, you have to tie everything into Angular's system. So Angular has like factories and services and providers and controllers and stuff, which means a lot of the code you write is tied to Angular. React kind of just does components to render stuff onto the page. And other than that, all the rest of the code you want to write, you just write as plain JavaScript. So if there ever was a situation where we needed to move off React, which I really hope there isn't, I've sort of staked my job on the fact that won't happen, there will be less framework-specific stuff to move. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that Angular is necessarily a bad choice, or that you shouldn't use it, or that Angular 4 is a dreadful bit of software. Like, not at all. Just for us, for a number of reasons, it wasn't a good fit for us. That's kind of the disclaimer for when someone watches this on YouTube and like tweets something, and then it just all goes badly wrong. So we decided what to migrate to, and how we're going to do it. And that, as it turns out, was the really easy part of this whole process, because then I had to actually start digging into the code on the store. So by my dreadful command line usage, I figured out there's roughly 40,000 lines of JavaScript, and I'm really bad at using the command line, so that's give or take 40,000. And a lot of those are tied directly to Angular, and they're in very Angular specific like terminology and kind of idioms. Also, the store it had been built and released, and it was working, and then we're still a relatively small company, so a lot of people were shifted off working onto the store to other things. So it had been kind of dormant, I suppose, for the last few months, kind of working but not being actually improved. We all know how JavaScript is these days. Like, if you don't update something every day, it's out of date. So we had to kind of deal with a bit that we had some outdated stuff. And also the crucial thing here is that we could never break the store at any point. We sell tickets pretty much continuously. We can't afford to have a day where it's broken because we're mid-migration or whatever. All right, so we did that, and I kind of sat down and figured out how actually tricky this would be, and had a little bit of a moment. This is a really bad water bottle for doing talks. That's what I've learned. I need a new one. Anyway, so then I sat down and I came up with the delicious theory of the ideal world and how we would migrate this stuff. And really it all boils down to components, or in Angular they're referred to as directives, but for the sake of this talk, they're effectively equivalent. So I'll probably use the word component, but if you're in Angular land, you convert that to be a directive. And so the store was built using these directives, and over the last maybe year or so, a bit longer, we've seen people swap from using this controller model view or MVC approach to building apps, which Ember and Angular 1 had, so it has controllers, into just building components, which are just different bits of little small building blocks that you squish together to make your whole application. And when you build apps like this, you end up with this kind of tree structure. So you have an Angular component at the top that renders two other Angular components that renders some more Angular components and so on, and it's a big tree. And so my general thinking and the way we approach this was, well, if it's a big tree, we can swap out this bottom left bit with some React. Once we've got there, we can swap out the big thing for some React, and we can rinse and repeat. There are a lot more than 9 components in our application, but we can repeat this over and over again and slowly work through, and then that will eventually get us to a point where it's React apart from the very top bit, and then we can swap the very top bit out, and then we can all go home, and that'll be good. That was our plan. And something that we actually didn't do until a couple of months in, which we should have done right at the beginning, was we sat down and we printed off literally a screenshot of every single page on what we called the core user journey. Because there are loads of features, as I said, on this platform that we don't really use, or maybe 1% of our sales use, so they're not that interesting to us right now. So we printed out the core journey, and we literally printed it onto a big whiteboard in the office. It's a little bit dark. I will put the slides up so you can see them if you're particularly interested. And you can see my dreadful estimates on the left, and you can see like where I put can't not included to caveat stuff and make excuses. But we sat down, we basically went through the whole user journey and kind of planned out all the different bits and what we needed to do. And then we kind of took one bit at a time, we split it down into smaller components. So you can just see on the very left over here, there's that page. We call this the listings page, but it's effectively like the home page. It's the first page you see when you come to buy tickets, and it lists all the dates that an artist is playing and where they're playing, and if you can buy like VIP tickets or whatever. And then we split those pages down into components, kind of keeping in mind that tree, the glorious ideal world. So up here you've got one where you can like log into a fan club where you get special offers and all the rest of it. And then you've got this like listings row which lists where they're playing, the dates, and then buttons. Then that listings row gets broken down even further into a date component that renders that date, and then one that renders this stuff, and then the buttons as well. So we did all this, and we did all this planning, and we split stuff down, and we thought, well, that's it. That's going to be nice and easy. It's very methodical. We can keep going bit by bit, and eventually it will take a while, but we will get all the way to a fully migrated piece of software. But as we all know, theory is very easy, slightly more complicated in practice. And there's one particular thing that makes it very, very complicated, or much more work than you might imagine, and it's Angular's dependency injection system. So Angular 1 was built in a time where there was no module system in JavaScript. You had no way to say this particular thing depends on these particular other things. So Angular provided one, which was a perfectly legitimate and reasonable thing to do. So in Angular 1, what you do is you define like your foo object, and you then like register it with Angular. So you say, I've got this service, which is basically just an object with some functions on that you can call, and I'm calling it foo. And here is the foo object, which contains all the stuff that this service does. So you register that with Angular, so Angular knows that there is something with the name foo. Doesn't matter what it does. And Angular doesn't care what it does either. Then somewhere else, in another part of your app, magically, you could define a controller or some function here, and just call the argument to it foo. And then Angular can tell that when you say foo here, you want this foo over here, and it injects it in as a dependency to that function. So then I could call foo.bar or foo.whatever. This is interesting. It's really cool. By the way, the way Angular does this is it actually calls toString on a function, which gets you like the literal function definition as a string. And there is one of the best and worst regexes I've ever seen to pull out everything in here and then figure out what all the names are and then give you the stuff you asked for. So it's pretty impressive. And it worked really well. And I worked on Angular 1 app way before we had ES 2015 modules. And it was really good. And it was actually quite refreshing to be able to do this and say, well, this controller depends on A, B, and C, and have all that stuff laid out. But with ES 2015, we have one of these now. I say natively, it's not actually out in browsers yet. Or it might be in one of the like Edge, bleeding like canary type browsers. Not entirely sure. But we can now do this natively, effectively. So we have constant foo, and we can export it. And then when we need to depend on it, we just import it like so. As an aside, ES 2015 modules are really, really cool, and I could ramble on about them for ages. I'm not going to, but if anyone is particularly interested and wants to be bored for 20 minutes, then feel free to come and talk to me. So this actually makes it really tricky to migrate stuff out of Angular, because we have this whole dependency injection system which we've kind of based our entire app upon that goes away, that doesn't work. So here's the real step-by-step process of migrating an Angular directive to a React component. So let's pick one. Let's pick like that buy tickets button that showed on the listings row as an example. So you find all the dependencies that directive injects into it. But of course, you need to then find the dependencies of that dependency and anything it injects. You need to build up a whole list of all the things, directly or indirectly, some directive depends on. And as I found out to my peril, a lot of the time you'd think that something was very easy, but it would be injecting something that was very tricky, and that would add a lot of time. So this is kind of a made-up example, but we take the listings button, and it injects the bus, the $timeout, $window, and this listings API, and this last click service. Then listings API also injects $Q, local store, which also injects these other three things. The last click service injects the toggle class service and the Google Analytics service and the store config service. So it doesn't matter what any of these do, and they're effectively made up. But just from wanting to move like one simple button to React, I've discovered that button is using Angular to inject all these other dependencies, which I need access to those dependencies if I want to migrate. So now, before I can even begin to think about moving the actual button to React, I have to migrate every single one of those dependencies to React. Okay, so that's not too bad. I mean, that's a pain and it's loads more work, but it's work that I'd have to do eventually. So, you know, I'll just do it step by step and it will take longer. But wait, it's still not that simple. Because let's imagine you want to migrate the local storage thing, which is like a wrapper around local storage that can use an in-memory storage if local storage is broken or whatever. So I want to move this local storage service away from Angular. So I open up the code and it's got something like this in it, Angular service local storage, and the function where all the functionality is defined. But this listings button isn't the only place where local storage is injected throughout my app. There's 15 other places where we depend on this local storage thing being injected. And one of our key goals is that we don't want to do big bang rewrites. We want to do very small, tiny migration steps. So if we migrate local storage service off of Angular, that's fine, but I then need to go to each of the 15 places where it's used and update their usage to not rely on it being injected. And that's going to slow me down. It's going to make a bigger, more riskier release where we've changed lots more. So we don't want to do that. Luckily, we can get around this with a bit more kind of hopping. So we first pull the local storage functionality out into plain old JavaScript. And then we can export it so that any non-Angular code can just import it as a plain JavaScript module. And then we leave kind of behind like this small Angular wrapper. So I pull most of my functionality out up here, and then I just leave a tiny little wrapper that gives Angular things access to that. If you want to picture this in the tree diagram, we've kind of pulled out the local storage thing into this plain JavaScript object, and we've left a tiny little Angular kind of pointer to it, if you like. So the React code can just pull it in directly. The Angular code can still inject it as it wants to. So the existing Angular code can still use it without knowing that has happened, which is good. New React components can import the non-Angular version, which is also good. The only small downside here is I've had to leave a little bit of kind of migration-specific type code floating around. So we've kind of come to define migration-specific code as code that you know will be deleted when the migration is finished. Effectively, it's a temporary stopgap. And unfortunately, you do have to have some of this, but it's best to try and keep it to a minimum, because effectively it's code that you know you're going to delete. So as you're writing it, you are making work for future you, which is the worst thing. So you want to keep that down to a minimum. Anyway, so we've now migrated all of these into plain JavaScript, and there's no more Angular to be found. The ones that have $, in front of them are like Angular-specific stuff, and they're not too bad either. $timeout is a wraparound set timeout. $window is the same thing, wraparound window. Ignore that $, sorry. And $Q is a wraparound promise. So they're not too bad. And now we can migrate the actual button to React, which is what I set out to do about 6 weeks ago. So we create the component, and I've left the specific details of it out. It doesn't really matter. We can import what we need to import and use what we need to use. So we've got that component, but now how do we actually start to embed this into an existing Angular thing? So another thing that Angular and React do very differently is that Angular defines templates, which are HTML that can have kind of JavaScript interpolated and placed into it. And it has lots of fancy directives like ng-repeat or ng-if that lets you hide or show elements conditionally based on various whatever conditionals you want. So in Angular, when you define a directive, you use it as if it were a regular HTML element. So in Angular land, you've got Rihanna at the O2, and then you've got this listings button, which is the old directive, the old Angular version of the directive. Except, of course, now I don't have this listings button anymore. I've now got my React component that will render the button for me. And we found a bit of software which has basically saved my life called ng-react, which lets you use React components within Angular, which sounds like the worst idea you've ever come across, but actually is a lifesaver when it comes to migrating. It lets you embed React components within existing Angular applications or components. There's actually nothing special about a React app being rendered somewhere. As long as it's got an HTML element, it can be rendered wherever you want it to, and you can have as many of them on the page as you want. Generally, you only have one React app and all your stuff exists within there. But when you're moving bit by bit from something to something else, it's good to know and be aware that you can embed React within to Angular. And this wouldn't have to be Angular. You could write code to do this in whatever framework you're working with. So we can swap it out, and with ng-react, we end up with this React component, bit of HTML where its name is listing button, and we pass in some properties, and we're happy, and that works. So this is really good, and this is how we got React into production very quickly. Only a very, very small bit, but we used this to kind of ship it and prove that we could ship it very quickly. And if you think back to that big tree structure where we're going bit by bit, we then can replace the Rihanna at the O2 with like a listings title component and use the same strategy to swap that out. And once we're at this bit, we're effectively at this point again in the tree where we've replaced all those very low level bits, and now their parent can be turned into a React component. Because now there's no Angular in here, it's just all React. So now I can create like a listings item component, and it will render a list item with the two React components in as well. And now suddenly our template can go from being a list item with two React components in to just this. And this is much better. We've basically hopped up the tree a bit and replaced something. So that really is the process we're going when it comes to components. We swap out little bit by bit, and it's worth noting as well that at each point, so we did a deploy here, we deployed that, we then deployed that, and then we deployed this. So we do it very, very bit by bit. The main reason being that if we deployed all of this at once and something broke, it could be the listings item, it could be the listings header, or it could be the listings button. But if we do it one by one and something breaks, we know exactly where the fault is, and it's much easier to either roll it back if we can't figure it out, or quickly figure it out and get it out. All right, so we've been migrating components, and yeah, that really, the stuff about the tree of components and going up the tree was really how we're doing the actual migration, and that's what I'm doing a lot of day to day. I just want to talk a bit more about how we're making sure things don't break and some other bits and bobs as well. So at any point there's any questions, feel free to just kind of wave at me. So yeah, so just a quick recap. We have to maintain functionality throughout this migration. Put simply, if you're a user and you go on every week and you buy 2 tickets for your favorite artist, you do that every single week, throughout this migration, you should never notice anything change. That's effectively the goal. Sometimes this is frustrating because we have to migrate bits of functionality that are like slightly odd, or little bits of UI that are kind of weird and we know we could improve. But on the whole, the goal here is to get the migration done so we can then move on. And so we needed to ensure that we have various tests and things in place that prevent us from breaking stuff. Because it's easy to migrate stuff across and accidentally miss one weird feature. So there was a fair amount of unit tests in the Angular code base, and you can migrate these tests across from Angular to not Angular specifically, and it's also used as a way to add test coverage. In my personal experience, I find that Angular stuff can be quite tricky to unit test. You have to sort of do a lot of setup, and it's tied to the framework. Again, I'm biased because I picked React as the thing to move to, but this is kind of a flavor of like what a test looks like in React. So you kind of you create this React element, so this in this case a listings date component, and then you just search for the HTML and expect it to take this date and produce Jan 1, 2016 and so on. So React is quite testable. If anyone wants to know more about testing React, there's a talk I did on YouTube somewhere, or I can link you to some things. So feel free to come and ask me about that. Unit tests are really good because they provide very quick feedback, and you can test very specific nitty-bitty bolts. But in our case, they're also, the kind of downside of them is that they're changing as we migrate codes. When we migrate feature X from Angular to React, we have to migrate the tests across. Of course, migrating the test is usually a case of copying and pasting and stripping out the Angular specific stuff and chucking in the React specific stuff and so on. And occasionally we might add a few tests or delete a couple of tests that are not needed and so on. But technically, the fact that the unit test passed isn't really like proof that everything worked as before, because ultimately unit tests are to some degree coupled to the actual code that they're testing and the actual framework they're using. So we also have a suite of acceptance tests, or the necessary evil, if you want to think of it that way. And these are things that actually fire up a browser and they go through as if they were a user, and they click and they put tickets in their cart and they pick how they're going to get them delivered, and they fill in payment details using like test credit card information, and we check that they get the right thing. So they run using a thing called Protractor, which is like a kind of tool on top of Selenium for testing this kind of stuff. They test the entire system, which is really good. There's no faked API calls or anything. It is effectively as if a real user was on our app. The downside of these is that they can be a bit flaky. I don't know if anyone else has ever written these. I can see some like, knowing grins so we've shared our pain, but they can sometimes just lag for no reason. The network can go down temporarily, which means the tests can't. Anyway, they're a bit of a nightmare. You do have to be prepared to rerun them 29 times until they pass, but the key thing is eventually they do pass. And they're also quite slow to run because they're firing up a browser and clicking around it. So there are some downsides to them, but the advantage for us is they are entirely independent of our migration. They don't care if the button they're clicking is a React button or an Angular button. So these are the best validation for us that we've migrated something successfully. However, because they're slow to run, we keep the acceptance test down to just like 5 or 6 core kind of user flows, like the most common instances. So again, they're not ideal, because in an ideal world, if these were quick and reliable, I'd have hundreds and hundreds of these that tested every single path a user could ever make through our app, and that would really confirm that everything worked. But they are slow. We only have 5 or 6, and they take a good kind of, if you run them one after the other on just one browser, they take like 15 or 20 minutes. So they are quite slow, unfortunately. That's not helped because in some of ours, we queue users, so the test that you have to wait for like a minute until the user is released from the queue, which is kind of good because it is testing real life, but frustrating because they're just sat there. So, there's pros and cons to them, but they are very good in confirming that you've migrated something correctly. And these run on every single build, and they have to pass to enable us to deploy. And to deploy, we have a thing called a pipeline, which is just using Jenkins, which is like a bit of software for continuous integration. There's loads of them out there. They all do roughly the same thing. Ours looks like this. I'd like to say it was usually more green, but this is actually pretty good. It's a good day. And you can see that it does things like it runs like ESLint and stuff. It runs the test is all the unit test, then it builds it, and then it chucks it onto staging, and then we run the acceptance tests. And you can see they average around 6 or 7 minutes, and then they get deployed as well. You're skipping ahead. Bear with me. It's all right. It's just a little teaser of what's to come. It's way less exciting than you think. Yeah. Honestly, it's a rubbish little bit of command line, but we'll come on to it. As in, how do I get this? This is just, that's the view on Jenkins. Yeah. And so these are defined using like a Jenkins file in our project, which is really nice because that means, so before, when I first joined, the store was on like the old version of Jenkins we have, and I'm not the person to talk to about different Jenkins versions because I don't know. But before, effectively, I had to nag someone on the tech ops team to like set up Jenkins for me. And then he swapped us over to this version where there's a Jenkins file in our project which defines like all these stages. And that's really, really useful because now I can like tweak this myself without having to interrupt him. But yeah, we only switched to this a couple of months ago, and it's been really good. We're big fan of this, and it's got cool things like it will run the acceptance test. If it all passes, it gets to this point, which is called production deploy hold, and it will sit there for half an hour, and it will just have a little button that says, "Do you want to deploy? Yes or no?" And I can click that to actually trigger the final deploy. Unfortunately, we're not quite at a point yet where we can continuously automatically deploy. The main reason being is that we do have like quite big like on sale events. Like Adele is selling all her tickets at 9 a.m. on Thursday, so we are probably not going to want to deploy at 8:55 on Thursday morning, or even probably the day before in reality. So we do try and release a lot, but ultimately there are some real life events that get in our way. But yeah, I can show you this later if that's of interest. I'll just load it up on my laptop. So this kind of gives me a bit of confidence. One of the things we do on the store is we track via like Google Analytics and a thing called Mixpanel loads of different events, like user completed an order and user filled out this, and we know how many people get to each stage, and people use this for all sorts of stuff. But this has actually become, quite surprisingly, a really good way to track if we've broken stuff or not. Because we can load it up, and Mixpanel has this really cool real-time view where it shows you real-time events coming in. So these are all the tickets requested events, which is when a user clicks to try and get a ticket. And I'm afraid I have had to like hide some of it. But effectively, you can see that, in the last, this was 20 seconds worth. And you see it's got like all the browsers that's coming in and what they're doing. So for example, recently we deployed the final form on the flow is the one that takes your credit card details. We moved that to React. And just as we deployed, I loaded up Mixpanel. I searched for like order complete, which is the event that gets fired. And I was just sat there quite nervously, and then like a couple of minutes later, a few flowed through, and they're on different browsers, and then I was way more confident. So something like this has been really, really useful as well, actually, for like making sure we haven't broken things, which is really good. We also use Google Analytics as well, so we know how many people are on the store and where they're at, and so on. But ultimately, on a big project with lots of users and lots of functionality and a few developers working on it, there will be fires, unfortunately. They are referred to as fires at Songkick. We have 2 people a week who are the firefighters. We're cool. You should come work with us. Unfortunately, yeah, fires will happen throughout this process. As much work as you put into tests and acceptance tests and testing on staging, so like before we deploy something, it goes to our staging environment where you can click around, and if you like that, that's the exact same code that will be deployed to production. All that stuff, we can cause fires. And I sat down, and I can only think actually of 3 that we've caused. I say we. 3 that I've caused. I'm sure there are more, but I'm trying to, I forget the things, selective like memory and all that. One of them was down to, and we have the kind of approach we've taken to this is, well, we are going to cause some bugs and some fires and the things that will go wrong, and that's unfortunate, but it is part of building software, unfortunately. But the key thing for us is how we can prevent then a similar thing happening again. Like something breaks. Why didn't we catch that? Let's make sure we catch it. So one of them was down to bad data. So we test on that staging environment, which uses obviously a different API to the real life project. And it had, the test kind of artist store we use was like a few years old. It was a bit outdated, and it wasn't quite in reality, like it didn't match up to ones that we used on the real live store. And a certain, like some difference in some data caused us not to pick up a bug that we should have. So after that, we fixed the test data, and we now test on a brand new, much more up-to-date, much more like real-life store. So that's really good. One was down to a particular journey that maybe like a few % of our stores use, not being covered by many tests. So we've covered it in tests. Another was caused by every developer's favorite thing, time zones. So actually, you remember earlier we had that listings row, and there was the date on the far left. That was the first thing I migrated to React, and it caused this fire. So we were off to a really good start. It was a weird thing where in different time zones, I think it was in Asia, it was ahead of us. Was it? I can't remember. Yeah, it was. It was 3 people in Japan were affected by this, where we showed them an event with the date 1 day ahead of when it was actually happening, which wasn't ideal, I'll be honest with you. So we then had to fix it and like grovel and email them and check that they could go to the event on the actual date, which was a bit messy. But we do now know, ultimately time zones are like nearly impossible to test automatically. If anyone has any ideas on how we can catch this stuff, I'd love to hear. I want to run acceptance tests in like different time zones. But now we do know that if we are working on a date-related stuff, just quickly change your max like system preferences to put the time to be like in New York or Tokyo or wherever, and do a quick sanity check. But more importantly than the fires happening, what people have really appreciated is communicating to the wider business and the people who work with our software. So that's the people who go out to like artists and sell them the Songkick experience and all the rest of it. And so what we've really made an effort to do is communicate when fires happen, why they happened, and apologizing and what happened. So after that one with the bad data, the fan clubs one, I sent this big email with the cause and the explanation of why it happened and kind of follow-up steps on what we're doing about it and stuff. So actually, we've been pleasantly surprised by how chilled people are about a fire and something going wrong. But what we found is this like communication is really appreciated and has been really valuable, and also like buying us some goodwill as well. I think people don't mind stuff going wrong as long as we communicate why and show that we really like actively care about it. And I really hope I didn't leave anything else private like unblacked out, but I don't think I did. I've read it a few times. But anyway, it's only going on YouTube. So we did that, and that's going well, and we haven't touched woods. Like, there's a lot. By the way, this wood is really expensive. Sam and I learned earlier. I don't know if anyone knows this. we were partial to a bit of a tour of this building, and is it Cuban mahogany? Yeah, and it's literally worth its weight in gold. Yeah, so yeah, it's same price as gold, this wood. Anyway, not really sure why I felt the need to tell you that. But anyway, so we were working on this software migration, and we knew it was going to be at least 6 months of work, more likely a year. And as it turns out, I've been doing it about 6 months now, and I can confirm it's more likely a year. And what's important, I've never really worked on a software project this long. Like I've worked for companies for more than 6 months to a year, but I've never worked on like one specific project for such a long period of time. Normally it'd be like 4 or 6 weeks, and then you go again, and so on. So we've been kind of trying to make sure we keep up the momentum and like the energy levels, because it is ultimately, at the moment, there is a small bit of light, a very long tunnel. And so during any migration, you have really hairy, daunting bits, and you have very nice, lovely bits. No one wants to do too much work with the hairy, daunting bits, and everyone wants to do lots of work with the nice, cute bits. So it's really a case. Sorry, I ended up watching Undertaker videos on YouTube. You know when you get into like a YouTube hole? I ended up on WWE and the Undertaker, and so that was my inspiration for this slide. So yeah, I don't know why I told you that either. But anyway, so what we found is it's been really important to mix larger, like multi-week bits of work, which there are. There are some bits where you will spend whole days and you'll write 1 or 2 lines of code, and they will mostly be like debugger calls to try and figure out what the hell's going on, versus like 1 to 2 day bits of work to keep the momentum going. And we've kind of spread this across the team, so you don't want to give anyone like big chunks of work all the time. You need to mix that up. So I've done pull requests like this that just moved a particular thing called currency. It's really called the currency service. I just wasn't feeling in a typey kind of mood, which is 98 lines added, not very big. And then there's bigger ones like moving that credit card input to React, which is nearly 1,000 lines added and much bigger. And you can see my really good commit messages, like it sort of mostly works. So yeah. And also, it's really important, we want to release regularly, and we want to try and avoid as many big bang releases as possible. So we've made sure to break large work down into small pull requests. If you remember this slide earlier where we split all these bits out from Angular, we could have done this all in one and done one big deploy, but actually you can pull like store config service out, and you can test and release that. You can then do the Google Analytics service and test and release that. So we've taken that approach. The main benefit being if something does go wrong, you can usually pinpoint very quickly what it is. If we released all this in one go and something broke, it could be any one of these, and testing that and finding that is going to be much more annoying. So release early and release often. We've also been following, I think, what's known as the Boy Scout rule, which comes from like when you camp in the wilderness to always leave things better than when you found them, or are kind of it's the same kind of thing with code. What we found is people like having short tasks to interrupt the big long ones. So even if you've got half an hour spare, or you dive into some work for half an hour and then you get interrupted, you should always leave things better than when you found them. So even if you dive into a bit of Angular code with the ultimate aim being to remove all the Angular from it, you might not get time to do that, but you might get time to add a couple more tests to leave us covered for when we do want to move it, or you might get time to do a small bit of refactoring or whatever it may be. So we're kind of trying to do as many kind of small incremental steps as we can. And we've also been mixing visual work with under-the-hood work as well. So obviously there are visual changes like building the React forms and the credit card forms and the buttons and so on. There's also a lot of underlying work on all the code that talks to our APIs and chucks stuff in local storage and all the rest of it. And we found making sure people have a nice mix of that is good, because it's not fun to work on loads and loads of under-the-hood stuff and never get to do any kind of visual work. Visual work here is a bit generous as well, of course, because we're like maintaining the current look. So even that can be a bit dull at times, but kind of mixing it up makes it a bit more interesting. And in answer to your question, you should also have some form of tracking or metrics, however rough they are. And these are very much internal metrics that we don't really share. And as I said, I'm dreadful at writing like bash scripts. But we have one called, oh no, I don't know if you can read that. I'm going to struggle. I'll share the slides. But basically what it does is it's a script that runs first through all our JavaScript files, and it's any files that mention ng, inject, or Angular, which is a sign that they have Angular within them, and it counts them up. And I'll tell you there are 126 of those. It then looks for files that have import React in and tells how many of those are, and there are 122 of those right now. This is literally taken from today. Now, this isn't a great metric for a number of reasons. There are lots of files that don't import Angular or React, for example. They're just not really represented. represented. I think from what I think, this will include all the test files, which again isn't really a fair comparison. And there's a few other kind of caveats like, but it's quite nice to have very rough numbers that as a team you're kind of working towards. So when I first added this script to the Jenkins pipeline, it was like 180 Angular files and 10 React files or something. So we can see, although we know it's not a perfect number, and it's not like when I've done like 2 more React files, it will be halfway or whatever, 4 I suppose if I could do maths. But we know that it is progress, and we can see that number changing all the time, which is nice. We've also got this other one, which we added quite recently, which gives us way more. The colors are even worse. I'm sorry about that one. But basically what it does is it looks for how many in our code for any in Angular style like dependency injections and tells us how many of those there are and what services are there. So according to this, and again, like this is the worst JavaScript script that's generating this you've ever seen in your life. I spent way more time on the nice colors, which has paid off. But there are 222 instances of Angular injections left across 64 different services, according to this. So again, that's probably not super accurate, but it gives us a rough idea of where we're at. And then it reads all the files from a folder we have called services. There are 59 files in that folder. And according to this, 33 of them are non-Angular, which is good. 26 of them are still Angular related. So, we have a few different metrics like this which we can run. We don't share these because they're useless to anyone outside of the team, but they're quite interesting to be able to run and see the progress. So we're looking through this migration, and we've got that light at the end of the big long tunnel, and it's very tricky to know how to prioritize this work because there is basically so much of it to do. And there have been 2 people on the team, me and a guy called Ben. We've now just acquired someone called Andy, who's moved from another team onto ours. So hopefully we should be able to pick up the pace a little bit and obviously spread the workload a bit more. But knowing what to work on has been tricky because ultimately there is just loads to do. So we've begun picking work based on the bugs and the churn rate of those files versus the actual quality of the code. And churn rate, what I mean by that is the amount of times during, I don't know, say a week or a month that a developer on the team will open and edit a file or look at a particular file. So for example, if there's some code that is really bad, like the top row, but you don't really touch it much, and it doesn't generate you that many bugs, that's probably quite low on the list of things to migrate. However, if there's some code that is bad and you touch it fairly regularly and it's generating lots of bugs, then you probably should kind of prioritize that. So we've been using this kind of metric as a way to decide what bits we work on now. So for example, one of the bits of our software that has a couple of kind of bugs that, they're not too bad, but they always kind of pop up on a semi-regular basis, is that bit that queues a user when they're queuing for tickets when there's lots of demand. And the code behind that queuing system wasn't written by anyone who's at Songkick. It's quite dense and quite tricky to follow. It frustrates fans who can't get tickets, and it frustrates customer support who have to regularly apologize for this. So we've picked that as the next thing to migrate because it's causing a lot of pain for both us and the wider company and our user base. There are other bits of code that are worse in terms of very hard for us to improve and work with, but they're in an area of the store which works very reliably. It doesn't cause us any issues, so we're kind of leaving that for now. Ultimately, we'll have to migrate everything, but you've got to pick and choose your battles at any one time. And remember as well that you can go back and rewrite migrated code. There seems to be this expectation when you migrate that, well, I've written that in React, I'm never going to have to touch that again because that is spot on. But that will never be the case. You will have to go back and refactor and rewrite stuff in React, and that's fine. You're not necessarily expected to get it right first time. And something that, again, is not really something I've ever had to do in previous companies, but have had to do more at Songkick, was communicate why we're doing this to the business. And at first when I started doing this, it was all about, well, Angular 1 isn't very good for X, Y, and Z, and React is really good for A, B, and C, and Angular is going to be outdated, and dependency injection, that's the worst, and so on and so forth. But obviously that means nothing really to anyone who's not kind of deep into the JavaScript world. So we've kind of flipped on its head and talked more about features and how right now when they ask us for a new feature or to fix a bug, it's really tricky and it takes us a lot of time. Or when a developer wants to help us work on our project, it's very tricky to onboard them because there's loads of stuff for them to get into their heads. Or the code base will be smaller, and when it's smaller, it will load quicker on mobile. And by the way, half of our users buy tickets on mobile, and the experience is not always the best. So doing that has really helped. And we've also tried to keep people up to date with where we're at on the migration. So rather than people knowing, well, Jack and Ben and Andy are working on the migration, and in 3 months' time they'll tell us they're a bit further along, we kind of ping them regularly to let them know when things are released. So we have a Slack channel. We have a thing called cross-functional buddies, or XF, which is, people from another team, in our case like artist services or customer support, who interact with the thing we build. We have a Slack channel called XF So Solid, because our name is So Solid. Being at Songkick, all the names are based on puns, usually of bands. So we're the So Solid crew because we work on like robustness and reliability. So we're So Solid. Before we were Robuster Rhymes, which better or worse, you can decide. Incidentally, no one outside of tech has any idea what any of the teams do, so I'm not sure it's always the best idea. But anyway, so I usually Slack them and say, well, we just released another part of the React migration, and let me know if it's got any questions. And this again builds confidence. When I was talking about fires and things, we Slack them, we let them know that we're releasing stuff and that we're testing it, and that tends to really help as well. And this is when I looked at Mixpanel and saw that someone had bought a ticket since I deployed, and that made me relax. So finally as well, migrating is a really good chance to kind of have a look at your tooling and see if we can kind of improve it as we go, and I'm going to move on very quickly. Migrations are a really good excuse to reconsider tooling. In the talk I did here, whenever it was, 7 months ago, I did a lot about like the JavaScript fatigue and the state of tools on the web and so on. And when we're doing such a big long-running migration, not only is it a good time to reconsider the tools we are using, but it's a nice break from doing the migration, if you like. It's really good work and it's really interesting, but it's quite nice to sometimes just step away and work on like one of our tools for a bit. So for example, all the tests were written using Karma, which is, I think I would go as far as saying probably the most popular testing kind of setup for Angular. It fires up like a real browser and it runs your tests in a real browser. We're migrating to React. We wanted to use a framework called we were migrating to React and wanted to use a framework called Jest, which is built by Facebook, and it works kind of on the command line. It doesn't fire up a browser in the background. It's quite nice. It's got a lot of nice features for like only running tests from change files, where it looks at Git commits to figure out what files have changed recently and therefore what tests to run. It's very handy. So we had about 600 tests across 130-ish files, and we've started migrating them to Jest. And you're not going to be able to see this, but if you do get the slides later and have a look, there's like 3 lines down here which track our test migration. And the first one says total specs 163, Karma specs 91, Jest specs 72. So again, we track a bunch of this stuff, and that's a really good kind of place where you can have like little bits of work that someone could do in half an hour. They could go and find a test file and migrate it. So we kind of like to keep people sane by having like those little things when you want to just take a break for a minute from a much bigger piece of work. And also when you're migrating things that are going on the actual website, obviously there's lots of testing and stuff to be done, quite rightly. Sometimes it's quite nice that you can move a couple of files to Jest and like push that and be done with it and get it done quickly. And similarly, we took the migration as a good chance to move off Browserify and a bunch of make files and things onto Webpack, which has been really nice, brought us more in line with the community, and with Webpack kind of being developed very aggressively, has brought us a lot of good stuff as well. So yeah, really the takeaway here is by providing the mix of like migration tasks, like big and small, visual ones, tooling, under the hood stuff, work has been fun and interesting for over 6 months, with probably 6 more months to go, and hopefully it will still be interesting then as well. So just to kind of summarize, we did a rough estimate the other day, and we estimate to be 35-ish% done, which was a slightly conservative estimate. I'd probably say more like 40 off the record type thing. And most of the core visual journey is now in React, which is really nice. All the forms that users interact with are now in React. So if you buy a ticket on Songkick, you'll fill in your details, fill in your delivery address, and fill in your card details. That's all done in React. There have been, other than the fires, very, very few bug reports in the React code. Most of our bugs still occur in the old code, which is kind of a good justification for our work. And I've put in a really bad pun here, which I'm regretting, but I've kind of got to do it now. But it was so far, so good. Hey? Okay. Yeah. I thought that was really funny, like before you all came in when I was down here filling with that, and it wasn't, was it? Anyway. So we've done some stuff well at this point, but also like I don't want to stand here and think that it's all done and it all works really well. Touch wood, touch very expensive, worth its weight in gold wood. I think that we will probably learn that at some point we've done some things not ideally or less efficiently than we could have. But so far we haven't hit any major blockers that have, really started to question if this is a good idea or not. So fingers crossed we've kind of taken the right approach. A lot of people say, well, when will you be done? What does done mean? There's kind of quite a natural done point for us. It will be when we've removed Angular from the code base, which I'm really looking forward to because it contributes about half of our bundle size, like Angular and the related libraries. So when we remove that, it will just be a great day all round. But of course, when that happens, we'll then have some React code that was written a year ago, which we could probably do with a bit of love as well. So we're never going to be done. And really, the whole point of this migration is to put us in a place to then kind of develop the store and develop it further and add all the features that we need to add. But that's our kind of done point for this migration. So just to finish up with some takeaways, I nearly put a picture of a takeaway in here, but I didn't. So I've made up for the sofa stuff with that. Don't migrate for the sake of it. Like framework X is out of date is not necessarily a reason to migrate. We quite strongly consider staying with Angular 1. And if we only need to maintain and improve what we had and not rapidly develop lots of new features and get more developers on board with it and improve like our mobile experience and all the rest of it, Angular 1 on its own wouldn't be a reason for us to migrate. Plan again. Again, the picture doesn't come out as well on here, but you can see it on the slides. This was from planning literally yesterday. We kind of whiteboarded a bunch of stuff, and I wrote "do not rub off," which probably means the cleaners have 100% rubbed it off. But so I showed that picture earlier of all the printed bits on the whiteboard. We did that about 2 months in. That was a dreadful idea. We should have done that right at the very beginning, and that's why we've kind of taken this approach of kind of very aggressively planning stuff out. Cross-business communication is much more important. Again, we didn't really do this. We just thought, we're just migrating stuff and don't really worry about it. It's fine. But actually, it's, then people really wouldn't know what we're doing. It's like, well, Jack and Ben, what are you spending all your time on? Like, we can't see any visible output. You send like notes on Slack saying you've released something, but as far as we can tell, it looks exactly the same. And it's tricky because ultimately the success of this migration is you don't know it happens. But actually talking about this and trying to externalize it more and sharing more with the company has been really good. You can even tell in like all hands meetings or big updates when the kind of people who oversee the whole of like Songkick's approach and how we're doing talk about it, and they are much more engaged than they used to be. So that's been really valuable. Prioritize based on the pain points in your current app. Like migrate the stuff that causes you pain sooner than the stuff that you can kind of push to one side and leave till later. Mix up tasks based on the difficulty, the visual tooling, the categories of task, I suppose, to keep it interesting and just give your like mind a bit of a break now and then. And also don't be afraid to just spend like half a day experimenting with something if it could help or not. We've done that a few times and it's been a nice kind of break. We have a thing at Songkick where every other Thursday afternoon you can kind of do whatever you want with it. So I tried adding a flow, as in the Facebook type thing, to our app. Decided it wasn't worth it, but it was a really good afternoon that got me away from like really heavy JavaScript otherwise. So that was good. Have some rough metrics that you can use to track progress. Again, it's just really nice to kind of run those on a weekly basis and see that the numbers are vaguely heading in the right direction. And don't be surprised if you end up rewriting some migrated code. Like you shouldn't end a migration with a perfect React code base. There'll probably be lots of cruft left over from the migration that you can then go back and update. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. I do hope that was useful. If you've got any questions, obviously I'm not running away. Like, feel free to ask me questions now. I'm Jack.Franklin at Songkick. We are hiring. However, we are hiring in London. Basically, less Gregs, more Starbucks. And I will put the slides up at some point at speakerdeck.com/JackFranklin. But yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take questions now or at the pub as well.
Thank you very much, Jack. Are there any questions for Jack? Because I will run and give you this microphone. Right, question fight. I'll come this way closer, you're closer.
Hi, Jack.
Yeah.
My main thoughts throughout the presentation was actually, it was really bugging me. I was like, if it was me doing it, I'd be thinking, this could have a really cool new fix, or this could be done so much better. And obviously you're going for one-to-one with React and Angular. How do you manage, like, have you got a big board where you're like, we should do this, when this is all done? How are you managing to keep up, like, the cool, new, fun stuff that you want to do later rather than do it now?
Yeah, we do. So I need to get better at getting that list out of my head. But we do have we've got a Trello board where we manage like the upcoming work, but we also have a thing on that just says in the future. And that is really where we list. And that actually really helps me in particular. I couldn't speak for everyone else, but it helps me get really motivated. So for example, just over roughly half of the people who buy tickets using the store do it on a mobile device. And we know that the experience on mobile isn't great and we'd love to improve it a lot. But we know that we can't really do that until we've done this migration. So actually part of the kind of real driving factor for me is all that cool stuff that we can do later on. But you're right, it's really tricky. It's more tricky when you like migrating a form. It's like, oh, we could change this, or this isn't quite the most friendly design, but it's like you have to kind of, I dump it into Trello and then I forget about it for now. But for me, yeah, the big driving factor is that big list of cool stuff we can do afterwards. Even just removing Angular and we'll make our bundle probably like half the size, which will mean it loads way quicker on mobile, which will immediately give us a better mobile performance like for free. Well, not for free, it took us a year, but so yeah, that's how we do it, and we do deal with it. Just dump the list, and it hopefully in 3 months-ish time, we should be in a position where we can start doing some of that stuff. So that's really exciting. There's one over there. And then I think there might be one over there afterwards, but go for it.
Mine's just around the sort of the test frameworks.
Yeah.
So firstly, who writes your tests? And secondly, did you use that as any sort of communications with the business?
So all our testing is done by us. So we do have a lady called Kim on our team who's like the tester. And so what we do is whenever we kick off a new piece of work or a new feature, we have it's called a kickoff. We talk through Kim has this amazing set of mind maps that map like every single edge case you've ever seen in your life, like on a mind map. So she's excellent. We'll sit down and say, well, we're going to migrate this form. And she's like, well, you need to know this edge case, this edge case, this edge case, this edge case. We do communicate to the business what the acceptance tests do, because they're kind of, almost our contract with them is that we will ensure that stuff is always working. But in terms of like the unit tests and who writes the acceptance tests, that's all us. But yeah, the core journeys, if you like, are a widely known thing across the company. Does that answer your question? Cool.
Was there another one?
There's one behind you.
Behind me.
He's behind you.
Oh no, he isn't.
Thanks for the talk. Did you ever consider not using a framework? So just going Angular just to
plain JavaScript?
Yeah.
No, to be honest. No, if you want my honest answer, we didn't. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I would love to try it. I think, I was biased from the beginning because I like React and I'm a big fan of it and I think it's a really good thing. So no, the choice to not use a framework never came to mind. I suspect we'd end up writing so much code to tie it all together that we would have been better off with something, but it's interesting, and it probably says something about the state of JavaScript that never even crossed my mind. No. Damn. Yeah, that's an interesting point. We are considering, so there's React, but there's also things like Preact and Inferno, which are like much more stripped down versions. So React weighs whatever it weighs, 40 something kilobytes, and Preact is 4 or something. So you forgo a few features, but at a lot of benefit. So interestingly, there are a lot of like frameworks that are basically trying to emulate React, but do it in a smaller way. So we're looking at some of those, but no, there was never any thought about not using a framework really. I'd love to see it and see how it actually goes in reality, but my suspicion would be React or something would do it better than we could do it. Bit interesting. Yeah, I think that's fair. So that so the point there was it 20 years ago you spent most of your time learning a language and now you learn most of your time learning a framework? That's what you said. Yeah, an equal amount of time. Yeah, I think that's more true of some frameworks than others because of kind of what they give you out the box. Again, this is my bias, like React hat on, but React has a much smaller surface area, whereas something like Ember and Angular, which are really good, I'm not hating on them. I don't want that to be like, I don't want to be misconstrued as doing so, but they provide way more for you, and they provide everything ever that you could ever need. With the idea of React is we give you React and then you plug in whatever else you want. But it is certainly an issue. Yeah.
Hey
Yes.
Jack,
Hey.
thanks for the talk. When you're migrating, do you see a performance increase or decrease with the bundles and the iframes that you have on people's sites? Are you seeing an effect there? Because you've got some old legacy code and new code.
Yeah.
Are you seeing a performance increase, or is it not making any difference at all?
So I
How
won't
does that
lie to you and
affect
say that we
those?
do profile performance extensively at the moment. The main issue and the main downside of doing this migration where we have Angular and React at the same time is we pay the cost in like the download size of our actual app, because we have the Angular and all the Angular's related things, and we have React and all the React related things that we need. So our bundle has increased by a decent chunk because of that, which is unfortunate, but that was basically the only thing we could do, and it will decrease by a lot more when we remove Angular. I haven't done any like performance profiling, to be honest, so I couldn't tell you. I'd say I guess that it probably doesn't make much of a difference, but I don't have any like numbers about that. One of the things that's on my big Trello board of things to do in the future is like test on mobile more. So for example, we have the ability to run our acceptance test on mobile we use Source Labs currently. We're considering a thing called Browser Stack, which lets you like run those tests on any device ever. And also if we could profile like Google have all the is it Lighthouse and a few other tools that let you profile web apps and see how they perform. That's kind of on my list of things to like add to that build pipeline, but we haven't got there yet, unfortunately.
Sorry, you moved from Angular to React.
Yeah.
'Cause things were taking longer to develop, but you've
Yeah.
spent 6 months rewriting it with no new features.
Yeah.
How do you sell that to the business? Because nothing's changing.
No.
You're not adding any new features. Technically, it's getting much better, but
Yeah.
how do you sell that? I don't understand.
I've wasted 6 months of my life. Damn, I better go actually. I think, it's a valid point, and that's something we struggled with a lot, and people didn't really understand. The way we sold it is we get fairly regular bug reports about certain parts of the store, and really our answer is, look, we don't understand this part of the code base that well, and additionally we get, there's a load of things we want to do in terms of the store and develop it further and add new stuff that I can't really talk about, and right now we'd be building on like quicksand if we did it now. So really what we've been saying is that give us give us 6 months now. We're hoping to get to the point where in 3 months time, so Songkit works quite heavily in quarters, so we just started quarter 2, and we said by the start of quarter 3 we'll be in a position to start building new stuff, and we already know what that new stuff will be. So for us it's been a case of, look, give us this time, and also I think we're helped a bit by the fact that I'm brand new to the company, and basically all I've done at the company is do this migration. So I said, look, give us 6 months, 9 months to do all this, and then we can really like nail down on new features. We've also talked about things like the performance on mobile. We know our store converts quite badly on mobile, and basically we said, like, look, we can't do anything about that right now, but if we migrate, we'll lose a lot of file size. We'll also be in a position where we understand the whole code base. Migrating to Webpack potentially allows us to consider like lazily loading bits in and increasing performance and all the rest of it. So we basically gave them a big list of things we can do once we've done the migration, and that's kind of been the main driving factor. Along with what we've also done, and in fact I didn't mention it when we talk about prioritizing things as well, is we purposefully early on picked things that we knew had some bugs in. So there was when you join like a fan club on the store and you log in and you get shown this exclusive content, there were a few bugs where say you tried to register and you have to type your password and the matching password. If they were incorrect, you get a red error that popped up. Then there was a bug that if you then typed in your right password and registered, the error that said your password was wrong hung around and you couldn't get rid of it until you refreshed. And there were a few like UI bugs like that we fixed along the way. So we started the migration by migrating bits that were buggy, and we were able to fix those. So say, look, it is mostly the same, but we are going to fix things as we go as well. And that's been enough, and I think they're on board now. But yeah, it did take time to kind of communicate that across, because you're right, you're exactly right. And what you just asked me is what a lot of people at work asked me as well.
Well, I think that's everyone. Thank you very much, Jack.